Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast listeners. This is the 67th episode of the Shipping Podcast, and I am going to introduce you to Andrew Faiola, who is the Director for Mobility Solutions to Europe, Middle East, Africa and Asia Pacific at Intelsat. I met Andrew when I was at Shipping 2030 in Copenhagen, end of March. So this interview was recorded on the 21st of March. Andrew is working with connectivity, and that is what everybody is talking about right now. The connected ship, the connected port, the connected people. And during the conference, there was a discussion going on about the costs for connectivity at sea. So who better to sit down with than Andrew Faiola? He will explain more in details what he's working with. And I think it's so fascinating that the infrastructure for connectivity at sea is finally there. Now it's up to us in the industry to use that tool in the best possible way. So, without further ado, this is Andrew Faiola for you. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Andrew Faiola. I'm responsible for mobility solutions at Intelsat in Europe. And what does that mean for us? That basically means I'm responsible for the commercial aspects of providing connectivity to any of our customers who are serving people who are in the air, on the sea, or on land and moving. And that's what we call mobility.
How did you enter the shipping industry?
Well, I'd say that maybe I'm not quite in the shipping industry, and hopefully that gives me a little bit of benefit of being an outsider and being able to ask questions about what people in the shipping industry need from connectivity. Our company is coming from the standpoint of providing connectivity to people who need it everywhere they need it. And as we learn more and more about the maritime environment and shipping, obviously this is clear. This is an area where connectivity via satellite is critical. How can we make that critical connectivity work for the shipping industry? So that's why we really want to learn more and more about what are the various things that are really important.
So what is your background? Are you an engineer or a finance?
I have a commercial background in economics, and I'm technical enough to make me dangerous. So I entered this industry because I am a bit of a geek, and I enjoy space and communications and rockets, and I was lucky enough to fall into this job.
How has your encounter with the shipping industry been so far? What response do you get?
Well, as a provider of connectivity infrastructure, we don't always get to touch the shipping industry directly. When we do, I think it's very useful for us, but it's also very useful for folks in the shipping industry themselves, because one of the things that we see is that often we're touching just one part of the shipping industry through our service providers, and that is coming really into this sort of procurement silo. And one of the objectives that we have really is to broaden that look, because as we, I think, are all knowing these days, the procurement silo is not always taking the broader view in terms of what does connectivity bring to a ship at sea. And it might not just be crew connectivity. It might not just be being able to file some reports or do ECDIS mapping or whatever, but how do you look at what connectivity provides across all operations of a vessel, and how does that then tie into that vessel's work in the whole global supply chain? You wouldn't run a vessel without some kind of fuel. You can't run a vessel without some kind of coherent connectivity strategy either.
Well, I think there are some people who think they could, but
yes.
Could you give us a reason why they really couldn't?
Well, I think one of the things that I've noticed is that and that we've seen from statistics is that the global shipping volumes have sort of flattened. And all right, we've seen everything from 2007 onwards about how the shipping industry, in many different segments of the shipping industry, has been really battered and bruised. And at some point, it simply can't go on that way. And I think there's a lot of forward-thinking shipping companies who have already recognized that. But there's some that haven't, and some that may well be left behind. But as global shipping volumes stabilize, or I don't think we're going to see, any kind of return to growth. And certainly that decoupling of shipping volume and global GDP, some people will say, okay, it's just a cycle and it's going to come back. My view is that we've permanently diverged and it's a new way of working. And you see shipping companies that are getting that are recognizing that connectivity now becomes part of the lifeblood of their operations. I think that's where we'll see things going.
So your role, you own the satellites, or how is...
Correct. So Intelsat is owning a fleet of satellites in space. We're putting together we have a network of these satellites that we own and operate that is providing connectivity globally, not just to ships, but also across the many segments that we serve, both media services, broadband enterprise connectivity, and as where I work in mobility, so ships, aircraft, and increasingly going forward, things like automobiles as well.
So how do I get to your services? Do I rent a part of a satellite?
No, this is a really good question for someone who's not coming from our industry, because we sort of live it every day. And it's obvious to us, but it's not obvious at all. We're in a sort of business-to-business space, so we work with service providers, and you would go to a service provider if you were a shipping company and were reevaluating your connectivity strategy. You would go to a service provider, like a Marlink or like an Orange Business Services or a KVH or someone like this, and you would say, all right, we are reevaluating our strategy. We need to do this and this and this. The connectivity solutions that we have today, if we use anything at all, we're just doing a little bit of that or a little bit of that. We need a coherent strategy. And you would go to them and they would work with you to figure out, okay, this makes sense, this makes sense. These applications, what about these applications? We're going to help you drive more value through your services. And that's how you would sort of touch Intelsat. We're probably not as well known, or I shouldn't say that, we're a very well kept secret because we sit behind. And, ultimately what we want to be able to do is provide throughput that should be ubiquitous and almost invisible for everyone. The days of sort of figuring out how not to use connectivity are going away, right? We're driving much more available connectivity to the ship in a much more competitive and economic way. And this should really help sort of unlock the ability to do things that people weren't able to do before.
We are attending the Shipping 2030 here in Copenhagen today. And my observation is that there has been more people offering services in a broader way. You don't have to do everything yourself as a ship owner, but you can buy services from different parts, and some people are offering a broader, you could tap into a network.
Well, I think this is true. I think that it makes sense to focus on what you do well, and there's people who do a really good job managing ships around the world. There's people like us who deliver more megabits per second to maritime vessels around the world than any other satellite operator. We do that pretty well, right? And then there's layers in the middle that pull it all together and create applications and things like that. They do that well. And it's really sort of figuring out, all right, who does what in the value chain best? Division of labor and invisible hand and all of that. And then that's also driving value rather than trying to necessarily do everything yourself.
The average ship owner owns 5 to 10 ships.
Yes.
And it's hard to be a digitalized world revolution then. So I think it's great that there is a new kind of services offered.
No, I think that's a really good point, because you're right? It's this huge long tail of shipping owners. You have your Maersk of the world and CMA, CGM, et cetera. And then, you've got tons and tons of small family-owned Greek shipping companies or whatever that have, dozen ships. And you wouldn't expect them to have that in-house expertise. Why should they?
No, but you wouldn't do that for a lorry owner either.
Correct.
Family-owned.
Correct. Yeah, this is a very similar type of situation. A farmer who has a couple of combine harvesters. Okay, what's he going to do as farming gets more and more sophisticated in terms of delivering a connectivity to a combine harvester that knows exactly where and when to harvest the crops, or a vehicle that's putting down seed or fertilizer or whatever. This is, all of a sudden you need a PhD in physics to be a farmer. So I think your point is very well taken. And yes, focus on where you know your stuff, and then work with partners who are expert in other pieces, and then pull that together.
And I also think it's interesting because we get more questions now on how to do this. It used to be, why do we want to do this? The connectivity. Or we are already on the same page here in this room, I don't know. But there is more like, how do we do it?
Yes, and I think we've gotten over one hurdle in that sense. I think the other hurdle that always comes back is, it's still very expensive and it's complicated, etc. And in our part of the business, we're really in the midst of a transformation ourselves. Over the past few years, there's been a very dramatic technology and innovation change that I've seen. Probably haven't seen that much change and disruption in sort of the previous 15 years. So we're managing through that ourselves by working with our partners in the ecosystem to basically to create new technologies in terms of the ground segment, terminals on ships and things like that, that are more reliable, better performing, and being able to marry that up with our satellite technology, which is also going through a transformation. So we have, we're in the process of launching a new generation of technology of satellites that we call high throughput satellites, the Intelsat Epic satellites, and they are able to provide much greater performance than anything else that's out there. But in order to unlock that performance, you have to have a whole ecosystem of terminal technology, modem technology, et cetera. And we've been working with partners in that sense for a number of years to get into this position now where it's all coming together. And just a couple of weeks ago, actually, we made an announcement with a company that we were an investor in called OneWeb, that we are now in the process, subject to closing and all of this stuff, of coming together as one company. And this is now bringing a low Earth orbit constellation of satellites in to the picture. And our vision is that we will have full integration and interoperability between our satellites and the OneWeb constellation, which all of a sudden creates a truly global broadband network. This will be fantastic in the maritime and shipping environment, but it's also going to help bring internet connectivity to schools in rural parts of the world, enable people to make phone calls on the cellular network from places where they never were before. So there's a bit of social good about that, but it's also good social business.
We have been talking about smart ships. Do you see other parts of the maritime industry also getting into the connectivity?
When you say other parts of the maritime
ports,
industry?
Terminals and...
Well, in terms of ports and terminals and things like that, what we see is more and more of them are being enabled through WiMAX and technologies like that. So, and then having that integrated into vessel communications. So when a service provider like a Marlink, for example, is providing connectivity to a shipping company, they're really looking at it from not just provide connectivity to the ship, and this is what Ericsson is doing as well, not just provide connectivity to the ship, but provide connectivity for that shipping company's entire supply chain. So they're connected all the way through, and it's transmission medium whether it's WiMAX or 4G or satellite, should be invisible for the end user, for the shipping company, right? It should just work. And that's where that layer in the middle is providing a lot of expertise.
Because I don't hear so many on the port side actually talking about connectivity as on the ship owner side.
I think on the land side of things, all right, connectivity is sort of a given. There's fiber. It's, there's connectivity more readily and easily accessible and available. But what's important is how do you tie it together? And again, that's the important bit. And there's regulation involved there. There's technology involved there. There's logistics involved there. And pulling that together, all right, as a commercial guy, I think, I can just pull this together. But it's not so easy. But that's what, there's a whole layer of service providers that this is what they're doing.
So I ask all my guests, how do you think that the shipping industry could become more visible to the general public? We are often called the Cinderella industry. No one knows about us.
Well, I can say that about the satellite industry, right? People forget that, all of their TV or much of their TV and, the ability to communicate in certain parts of the world and GPS, for example, things like that are all part of the satellite industry. And if it all disappeared, then what? But do you want to be better noticed in the shipping industry?
I don't know. Some people do, some people don't. I think if you think about recruitment, the next generation, we are going to be fighting over them with all other industries.
This is a very good point in that, okay, maybe the regular consumer doesn't need to know about the shipping industry, but shipping industry is a place to work, somewhere that someone could build a career. This is interesting. How do you provide visibility? I mean, in our own business, right, we are always really excited to try to bring in new young people. And it's sort of a difficult industry because it's engineering oriented and a lot of studies are required and a lot of people don't know about it. So I think there's a lot of similarities in that sense. And I think we also have we feel a little bit with the shipping industry as well, because our business has many of the same types of challenges in that it's very CapEx oriented. You plan for, if a ship is going to have a 20-year lifetime, our satellites are having a 15-year lifetime. How do you try to build a business there? And then also, how do you attract talent? And, we try to do quite a lot of outreach in terms of STEM programs and things like that. But you have to be active. You can't be passive about it because otherwise the pool of talent is drying up.
It's another aspect is that, the general public may not be interested, but they are the voters for our politicians. And if we don't get the politicians on board what we want to achieve, then we are also left alone.
No, I agree. I mean, we have similar challenges in our environment around policy and regulations around using things like radio spectrum. And how do you ensure that, our little part of the communications industry has what it needs to thrive and to interoperate with the rest of the communications business. Shipping, it will be the same, right? This is the lifeblood of goods and service around the world, the sort of the blood going through the arteries. You can't pinch that off. So how do you make sure that policymakers are doing what you need them to do to help the industry survive?
So maybe we should do a joint venture with the satellite industry. So who would you be interested in listening to in a shipping podcast? Who do you think I should interview the next time?
That's a very good question. I'd be interested from my own perspective to hear a little bit about how some of the crew deal with life at sea, because I don't have experience with that. And I think that would be, we do plenty of surveys. We did a survey with Future Nautics a couple of years ago. We're working on some other surveys around things like digitization and crew welfare and things like that. So we have plenty of statistics, but it's always interesting to hear, directly from the people who are living that life, how they cope at sea for weeks at a time and things like that. What's most important to them.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me.
Oh, this is my pleasure. Thank you.
Wasn't that exciting? I think it's exciting that the maritime industry is at the top of the agenda for all suppliers of connectivity and satellites and things like that. That is something new. Another thing that is new is that more and more companies within the maritime industry is looking to start podcasts. I think it's great. I am welcoming more podcasts about the maritime industry. We need to get out there to draw the attention to all the exciting things that is happening within our industry. If you do that through audio, which is another channel that hasn't been used that much before, or if you use other means, I don't have a problem with which channel you are working in, but please think about how you can reach more people through digital communication. If you want any advice, please let me know. I've been doing this for quite a while now. I hope you enjoyed this episode. This was the last interview I made when I was in Copenhagen. The next interview comes from Finland, so I'm keeping it in Scandinavia at the moment, but we'll see what happens down the line. Please visit shippingpodcast.com and comment on the episode, or use the Twitter handle shippingpodcast, or go and find the account Shipping Podcast on Instagram, where I also post things about the current episode. I have to leave, so from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.